so that explains them. I hate it when people come in and talk and then go away without waiting to hear what other people have got to say. And so I'm apologizing in advance. As Renata says, I can't even be slightly late for the beginning of the committee, which is down at the Pally Wilson, since I'm in the chair and it just doesn't look too good when the chair's the last person to arrive. So I will be leaving in about half an hour. I'm also the warm-up act in a way because I'm more looking back and forward and just giving a bit of background for those who don't have it as to the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry. And I was very excited and I remain grateful to have been a member of this commission. It was unusual, it was unique. NGOs here will know how frequent it is for civil society to ask a state if there's a problem, set up an independent commission of inquiry, preferably of international personalities and so on and so forth. As far as I'm aware, this is the first one ever set up by a government, a wholly internationally composed National Commission of Inquiry. And that of itself was a good example. And was one of the strong attractions for myself and I suspect some of my colleagues to join the Commission. Second of all, we had a hard task. We had to do in 4 months what, say, the Bloody Sunday inquiry for Northern Ireland, investigating one incident in one place on one day, took 10 years to do. We had to try and do in 4 months an enormous number of cases across a month and continuing. And obviously we wouldn't claim to have dealt with each element of it in the same kind of thoroughness, but somehow or other I hope we managed to get a reasonably decent and balanced reading both of the background and of the facts. Incidentally, our secretariat had to be set up from scratch as well. So I don't mean to be defensive, on the contrary, I mean to evince a certain pride in my colleagues and the ability that they had to make things happen under such circumstances. And it still wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had absolute cooperation from the authorities that set us up. We did have absolute cooperation from the Bahrain government. And we came to a series of conclusions and recommendations. It's very easy to access the report, even for somebody as cyberphobic as I am. You just go to bici.org.bh and you can access the report right there from the front page. Chapter 17 is the part that has the general conclusions and recommendations. Each of the chapters has some specific issue conclusions and recommendations as well. And we had to cover a lot of stuff. People sacked from their jobs. People expelled from the university. People arrested in mass arrests, detained, tortured. People killed while demonstrating. And people killed in other contexts as well. It was a very serious situation, and it was a situation that was actually continuing while we were working, certainly there are aspects of it that continued afterwards. I'll probably disappoint some of you, but I won't be speaking too much about the aftermath. And the reason I'm not going to do that is that I had such access while I was on the Commission to such excellent information, which I just haven't had since. And I just couldn't claim to have the same sort of authority to speak about what's been happening since as I had then. And I wouldn't want to be misleading. It doesn't mean I'm not going to say anything, but it means I'm going to be rather measured in what I say. what did the Commission do? It looked at the different issues that were in the mandate. All those issues I mentioned, all those problems I mentioned were in the mandate. The government wasn't for a moment trying to hide the issues from us. Our mandate required us to look at all the issues I've mentioned and some others that I haven't mentioned, but I'm conscious of the time. And we came up with a load of recommendations. And I'm aware that some of them have been implemented to some extent, others of them may be unimplemented, and others are perhaps not quite sure how full or empty the bottle is from a distance. On the anniversary of the report, which was last November, one of the issues that was of particular concern was the almost total impunity that seemed to be prevailing. Impunity for offences of torture and unnecessary use of lethal force and so on. It's now clear that there has been some movement there. It's not clear how much. Certainly it's a limited number of prosecutions and convictions, but nevertheless there are some. It's also not clear to me how high up it goes. One of the recommendations of the Commission was that the responsibility should rise to the level of actual responsibility, not those who are faced with what might have been difficult situations anyway on the ground. And so far I don't have an impression that responsibility has yet, at any rate, percolated up to what must have been the higher levels of authority behind some of the activities, if only because it was a combined operation of several different security force bodies. Another area of concern was that we felt all political prisoners, prisoners of conscience, that's non-violent political prisoners, should be released and have their records expunged. And quite clearly that didn't happen. A large number have now eventually been released, but certainly they haven't had their records expunged, and I understand many are still being denied the possibility of work. This would be true of some of the doctors, for example. Even though they have been released, their records haven't been expunged and they haven't been reinstated. And there are some who are still serving quite long sentences for activities that simply did not involve the use of violence. Another important recommendation that we made, and I'm not clear as to what progress has been made. I know there has been an announcement, but I don't know what actual implementation there has been, and that is the issue which we had very much to heart of integration of the security forces. In fact, quite a number of the majority community in Bahrain were sacked from the security forces at the time of the events in 2011, and I won't comment on it other than to say that it was certainly perceived by many as a reflection of lack of trust, and possibly even more than that. So one of our recommendations was, it's something that many people in this work we do have learned, is that if you have a community that is split along ethnic, religious or cultural or whatever lines, you do not get respect for the security forces if they are perceived to represent only one community. And so that was an important recommendation which we have not as yet, at any rate, I have not as yet seen implemented, though I'm encouraged to have heard that there's talk of trading 400 members of at least the police who are part of the security forces. We had hoped when we adopted the report that it would lead to, that its implementation would lead to dialogue. and indeed that its reading would lead to more mutual understanding. One of the real things we discovered, and it's not abnormal in such situations, was a dialogue of the deaf. Each community had its own narrative, and that narrative varied from deep history to current events. And we did our best to try and find a narrative that was a fair reflection of reality. I've been at meetings where I have certainly heard people from both communities just taking the view that their version of history is still the version of history. It's clear that they haven't read some of the parts of the report that talk about those things, and that's also true for other parts. So there's been a lot of lip service to our general observations and recommendations without necessarily clear absorption. So that didn't lead either to full implementation or to full confidence building, which I suppose is why there has been continuing troubles, to use the language of Northern Ireland again, in Bahrain. And it's very encouraging now to hear that there is a dialogue underway. And I think it's incumbent upon all those who are concerned about Bahrain, either inside or outside the country, not to say or do anything that would threaten, jeopardize a possible outcome of that dialogue. I'm not taking a view one way or the other as to whether I think it will succeed or not succeed, but I don't think it is appropriate for anybody who's trying to play a constructive role to damn it out of hand, to consider it foredoomed out of hand. If it's being undertaken, it's being undertaken by some people on both sides, whom one has perfectly good reason to believe want the dialogue to succeed. Doesn't mean to say that all people on all sides do. So, again, I'm reluctant to myself say anything that would jeopardize that dialogue. I think it's a good thing that it's happened. But obviously I would like to see more implementation of the BICI recommendations, especially the ones I've drawn attention to, because I think they're fairly central to a full building of confidence that would be most helpful for advancing the dialogue process. I'm sorry to sound a bit portentous and even pretentious, and I don't think human rights issues should be held hostage to political dialogue. Don't get me wrong on that. I think that human rights issues have not to be covered up in favor of political dialogue. Human rights can't be held hostage that way. But that doesn't mean also that they should be used to try and scupper political dialogue. It's a question of tone, it's not a question of content. On the contrary, the victims of human rights violations need to have their violations redressed, repaired, compensated. And those responsible for criminal human rights violations need to be brought to justice. Thank you very much for your attention.